The notification chimed softly on Nora Blackwood's wrist display as she welded a fractured hull plate on Deck 7 of the orbital salvage station. She ignored it at first. Messages during work hours were usually just assignment updates or supply requests. But when it chimed again, then a third time with increasing urgency, she finally paused her plasma torch and flipped up her welding mask. The message header made her heart skip. Estate notification, urgent response required. Her grandfather Aldrich Blackwood had died. The old man who'd vanished from her life 15 years ago, leaving behind only whispered family stories and her mother's bitter tears. Nora stared at the glowing text, feeling oddly empty. She'd grieved for him long ago, when he'd chosen his obsessions over his family. But the second part of the message made her hands tremble. Against all odds, against all logic, he'd left her something. Not money, the legal firm was very clear about that, but property. A small asteroid claim in the outer reaches of the Helix Nebula, complete with whatever structures and contents remained. Bad news? Asked her supervisor, Jensen, floating over with the casual grace of someone who'd spent 30 years in 0G. My grandfather died, Nora said, still staring at the message. Left me some rock in the middle of nowhere. Jensen's weathered face softened. Family's family, even when they're gone. Take the time you need. 3 days later, Nora was piloting her small transport ship through the swirling purple clouds of the Helix Nebula, following coordinates that led to the absolute edge of mapped space. Her grandfather had always been eccentric, a brilliant engineer who'd worked for various corporations before disappearing into the outer systems. Her mother had called him a dreamer and a fool. Looking at the endless void around her, Nora was beginning to agree. The asteroid, when she finally found it, was underwhelming. A chunk of dark rock maybe 2 kilometers across, spinning slowly against the nebula's ethereal glow. But as she approached, her sensors picked up something unusual: refined metal structures, power signatures, and what appeared to be a docking bay carved into the rock itself. "What were you up to out here, old man?" she murmured, guiding her ship toward the bay. The docking system was automated but ancient, responding to her approach with jerky mechanical movements that suggested decades of disuse. As her ship settled onto the landing platform, Nora could see through the transparent barrier that the bay was pressurized and heated. Someone had built this place to last. The airlock recognized her biometric signature. Apparently her grandfather had been planning for this moment longer than she'd realized. Inside, the facility was larger than it had appeared from outside, with corridors and chambers carved deep into the asteroid's heart. But it was the main hangar that took her breath away. The space was cathedral vast, with work lights illuminating something that defied easy description. It looked like a ship, but unlike any vessel Nora had ever seen. Where most ships were angular and utilitarian, this was all flowing curves and organic lines. The hull seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and strange symbols were etched along its length in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Activation detected," said a gentle voice that made Nora jump. "Welcome, Nora Blackwood. Your grandfather has been waiting for you." A holographic projector hummed to life, and suddenly Aldrich Blackwood stood before her. He looked older than she remembered, his wild hair white as starlight, but his eyes still held that familiar intensity that had both fascinated and frightened her as a child. "If you're seeing this, little star," the recording said, using the pet name that brought tears to her eyes, "then I'm gone and you found your way home. I know your mother told you I was crazy, chasing impossible dreams out here in the dark. But she was wrong about one thing: I wasn't chasing dreams. I was chasing truth." The hologram gestured toward the strange ship. "This is the Star Weaver, and it's not entirely my creation. 20 years ago, I found something in the deep void. A derelict ship from a civilization that died out long before humanity reached the stars. Their technology." He paused, and Nora could see wonder and fear warring in his recorded expression. "It's beyond anything we've achieved. They could weave space and time like fabric, travel between stars in heartbeats rather than years." Nora approached the ship, running her hand along its strange hull. The metal was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse gently under her fingers. I spent decades trying to understand it, her grandfather continued. Reverse engineering what I could, building this hybrid vessel. The Star Weaver uses both human and precursor technology, but I could never complete it. I was missing something, not just parts or knowledge, but perspective. It needs more than one mind to unlock its secrets. The recording flickered, and for a moment Aldrich looked directly at her. I know I failed you and your mother. I chose my work over my family, and I'll regret that forever. But this is bigger than any of us. The precursors left behind more than just technology, they left a warning. There's something coming, something that destroyed them, and humanity isn't ready. Nora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the asteroid's recycled air. Coming from where? As if hearing her question, the hologram continued. The corporations have been finding precursor artifacts for decades, but they only see the profit potential. They don't understand the danger. The Star Weaver isn't just a ship, it's a key. With it, someone could find the precursor homeworld and unlock technology that could transform humanity, or destroy it. The recording began to fade. I've hidden the final components you'll need, along with all my research. But be careful, little star. Others know about this place now. The corporations have been tracking my work, and there are those who would kill for what you've inherited. Trust carefully, and remember, the universe is far stranger and more dangerous than any of us imagined. The hologram winked out, leaving Nora alone with the impossible ship and the weight of her grandfather's legacy. She spent the next hour exploring the facility, finding workshops full of strange tools, laboratories with equipment she didn't recognize, and living quarters that suggested her grandfather hadn't been entirely alone out here. In his personal chambers, she found a wall covered with star charts and photographs. Some showed nebulae and distant galaxies, but others depicted ruins on airless worlds, vast structures that certainly weren't human in origin. At the center of it all was a photograph that made her blood run cold, a massive ship, dark and predatory, emerging from what looked like a tear in space itself. Scrawled across the bottom in her grandfather's handwriting were two words, "They return." As if summoned by her discovery, her ship's proximity alarm began to wail. Someone else had found the asteroid. Nora rushed to the hangar bay's control station, her heart pounding as she saw a sleek ship approaching through the nebulous glow. Its design was unfamiliar, but she could see weapon mounts and sensor arrays that suggested its pilot was far from friendly. Her grandfather's final warning echoed in her mind as she watched the unknown vessel dock with practiced precision. The inheritance she'd thought was just a monument to an old man's obsession was apparently much more valuable, and dangerous, than she'd ever imagined. As the airlock began to cycle, Nora grabbed a plasma cutter from her grandfather's workshop and positioned herself behind the Star Weaver's landing strut. Whatever came through that door, she was about to discover that her quiet life as a salvage engineer was over forever. The universe, it seemed, had other plans for Aldrich Blackwood's granddaughter. The airlock finished its cycle with a soft hiss, and Nora held her breath as the inner door slid open. The figure that stepped through was tall and lean, moving with the fluid confidence of someone comfortable in dangerous places. He wore a dark jacket over worn spacer's gear, and his hand rested casually on the grip of a blaster that had definitely seen use. "Easy there," he said, raising his free hand as he spotted her makeshift weapon. "That plasma cutter's more likely to fry your own circuits than do me any harm." His voice was warm and deep, with the slight accent of someone who'd grown up on the rim worlds. As he stepped fully into the light, Nora could see he was perhaps 30, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and there was something about the way he moved that suggested he was no stranger to violence. "Who are you?" Nora demanded, keeping the plasma cutter raised despite his casual dismissal of it. "How did you find this place?" "Name's Dante Cross," he said, his gaze traveling past her to take in the hangar's contents. When his eyes fell on the Star Weaver, they widened slightly. "And I found this place the same way your grandfather did, by following breadcrumbs through the void." He took a slow step forward, hands still visible. I was Aldrich's supplier for the better part of 15 years. Rare components, restricted materials, the kind of things that don't show up in corporate catalogs. When he stopped responding to my messages 3 months ago. He shrugged. I figured I'd better check on the old dreamer. Supplier? Nora's grip on the plasma cutter loosened slightly. What kind of supplier? Dante's smile was crooked and entirely too charming. The kind that doesn't ask too many questions about what his customers plan to do with quantum resonance chambers and crystalline matrix cores. Your grandfather paid well and in advance. That made him my favorite kind of client. He gestured toward the Star Weaver. Though I have to admit, I never imagined he'd actually build something like that. When he first started ordering precursor-compatible components, I thought he'd lost his mind. Precursor-compatible? Nora lowered the plasma cutter entirely. You know about the alien technology? Sweetheart, I've been smuggling precursor artifacts for half my life, Dante said, his tone becoming more serious. There's a whole black market for that stuff. Most buyers are corporations looking to reverse engineer new weapons or drive systems. But your grandfather, he was different. He wasn't just collecting artifacts, he was trying to understand them. Dante walked closer to the ship, and Nora found herself studying the way he moved. There was something almost predatory about his grace, but also something protective. When he reached out to touch the ship's hull, his expression became almost reverent. Stars above, he breathed. He actually did it. He merged human and precursor engineering. He turned to look at her, and she was surprised by the intensity in his dark eyes. Do you have any idea what this represents? My grandfather left me a recording, Nora said carefully. He mentioned it was dangerous. That corporations would kill for it. Dante's expression darkened. He wasn't exaggerating. There are people who've been hunting for something like this for decades. The precursors had technology that makes our best ships look like toys, but their artifacts are usually too damaged or too alien for us to use directly. This. He gestured at the Star Weaver. This is a bridge between two civilizations. And you want it, Nora said, raising the plasma cutter again. Want it? Dante laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lady, I wouldn't know what to do with it if you gave it to me. But I know people who would, and most of them aren't the kind you'd want to meet in a dark corridor. He moved closer, and Nora was acutely aware of how much larger he was than her. But instead of feeling threatened, she found herself noticing other things, the way his jacket hung open to reveal a glimpse of a muscled chest, the intelligence in his eyes, the fact that he smelled like ozone and something indefinably masculine. The question is, he continued, what are you planning to do with it? Because sitting here playing guardian to your grandfather's legacy is going to get you killed sooner rather than later. I don't know, Nora admitted. I'm a salvage engineer, not whatever this requires. But my grandfather seemed to think I could figure it out. Dante studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. Maybe he was right. Aldrich always said the precursor technology responded to intuition as much as knowledge. And you've got his eyes, that same look like you're seeing something the rest of us are missing. Before Nora could respond to that oddly intimate observation, her ship's proximity sensors chimed again. This time, the reading made her blood run cold. 3 ships were approaching fast, their profiles matching corporate security vessels. Meridian Corporation, Dante said grimly, checking his own scanner. I was afraid of this. You led them here. Nora accused, raising the plasma cutter again. I did no such thing, Dante snapped. But I may have been followed. Meridian's been tracking precursor artifact trades for months. If they monitored my last transaction with your grandfather. We have to go, Nora said, panic rising in her throat. They can't get their hands on this technology. Go where? Dante asked. Your transport won't outrun corporate interceptors, and my ship's fast but not fast enough to carry 2 people and whatever research your grandfather left behind. Nora looked at the Star Weaver, its alien curves seeming to pulse with inner light. What about her? Is she flight-worthy? Dante stared at her as if she'd suggested they sprout wings and fly. That thing's never been tested. For all we know, starting it up could tear a hole in space-time. Then we'd better figure out how to do it properly, Nora said, surprised by her own determination. Because I'm not letting them have my grandfather's work. She moved to the holographic projector, hoping there were more recordings. The system activated at her approach, and suddenly Aldrich's image appeared again, but this was a different recording, triggered by proximity sensors. If corporate security has found you, her grandfather's voice said urgently, then time is shorter than I hoped. The final components you need are in storage bay 7, along with the activation protocols. But be warned, the Star Weaver requires two minds working in harmony to properly interface with the precursor systems. You'll need someone you trust absolutely. The hologram looked directly at her. The ship will test that trust, little star. The precursor technology responds to emotion as much as thought. Deception, fear, hatred, these things can destabilize the quantum matrix. Only those who truly care for each other can safely pilot her. The recording flickered out, leaving Nora and Dante staring at each other in the suddenly charged silence. Two minds, Dante said slowly. Working in harmony. Someone I trust absolutely, Nora added, acutely aware of how close he was standing. Well, Dante said, his crooked smile returning, I suppose this is where I point out that I could have killed you a dozen times already if that was my intention. Despite everything, Nora found herself smiling back. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. How about this, then, Dante said, stepping closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I've spent the last 15 years of my life running from corporate oversight, dodging system patrols, and generally thumbing my nose at authority. The idea of stealing the most advanced piece of technology in known space right out from under Meridian's nose? That sounds like the best job I've ever been offered. His hand came up to gently lower her plasma cutter. Besides, your grandfather trusted me enough to keep dealing with me for 15 years. That has to count for something. The corporate ships were close enough now that Nora could hear their engines through the asteroid's hull. In minutes, they'd be docking. She looked into Dante's dark eyes and saw something there that made her pulse quicken, not just determination, but something warmer and more dangerous. Storage Bay 7, she said, making her decision. Let's see what my grandfather left us. They ran through the facility's corridors, and Nora was acutely aware of Dante beside her, the sound of his breathing, the way he moved with such fluid grace, the protective way he kept himself between her and potential danger. When they reached the storage bay, the door recognized her biometrics and slid open to reveal racks of components that hummed with barely contained power. Precursor quantum cores, Dante breathed, his voice full of awe. I've never seen so many in one place. Can you install them? Nora asked, gathering up data tablets that contained her grandfather's notes. With your help, maybe, Dante said. But it's going to require us to work very closely together. The precursor systems don't just interface with the ship, they interface with the pilots. We'll be connected on a level that's... He paused, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Intimate. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities that made Nora's heart race. Outside, she could hear the sound of docking clamps engaging as the corporate ships arrived. Then we'd better get started, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Because I have a feeling that once we activate that ship, there's no going back. As they gathered the components and ran back toward the hangar, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that her grandfather had planned this all along. The ship required two minds working in harmony, someone she trusted absolutely. And despite having met him less than an hour ago, she found herself trusting Dante Cross in a way that should have terrified her. Instead, as corporate security forces breached the outer airlock, she felt something else entirely, a sense of rightness, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together at this moment. The Star Weaver was waiting, and whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Victoria Sterling checked her weapon one final time as her boarding team prepared to breach the asteroid facility. Through her helmet's display, she could see the thermal signatures of two people moving rapidly through the complex's interior corridors. The mission briefing had been simple: secure the precursor artifacts and eliminate any witnesses. It should have been routine. Victoria had led dozens of similar operations for Meridian Corporation over the past 8 years, cleaning up loose ends and protecting corporate interests. But something about this assignment felt different. The urgency in her supervisor's voice, the way the board had fast-tracked the mission approval, the explicit kill order for what appeared to be a civilian salvage engineer, it all felt wrong. "Team Alpha, you're clear to advance," she said into her comm, watching as her 6-person security team moved through the outer corridors. "Remember, we need those artifacts intact. Everything else is expendable." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. Victoria had joined Meridian's security division straight out of military service, drawn by their promise to help humanity expand safely into the galaxy. Over the years, she'd told herself that the morally gray operations were necessary, that protecting corporate assets ultimately protected human interests. But lately, those justifications were getting harder to swallow. "Ma'am," came the voice of Sergeant Hayes, her second-in-command. "We've reached the main hangar. You need to see this." Victoria moved quickly through the facility, noting the signs of long habitation. This wasn't just a storage depot, someone had lived here, worked here, maybe for years. When she reached the hangar entrance, what she saw inside made her breath catch. The ship was impossible. That was the only way to describe it. Where human vessels were all angles and utilitarian design, this craft flowed like liquid metal frozen in time. Strange symbols pulsed along its hull with inner light, and the very air around it seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy. "Precursor technology," she whispered, recognizing the alien aesthetic from classified briefings she'd seen years ago. But this wasn't just another artifact recovered from some dead world. This was a working synthesis of human and alien engineering. "Movement in the ship's interior," reported Hayes. "Two targets, armed and moving toward what looks like a control center." Victoria activated her suit's enhanced optics and zoomed in on the ship's transparent sections. She could see them now, a woman with short dark hair wearing a salvage engineer's coveralls, and a man in spacer's gear who moved like someone comfortable with violence. They were working frantically at what appeared to be an alien control console, installing components with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am, should we breach?" Hayes asked. Victoria hesitated. Standard protocol was clear, but watching the two people work together with such obvious trust and coordination made her think of her own partner, former partner, who died in a Meridian operation gone wrong. The official report had blamed equipment failure, but Victoria had always suspected there was more to the story. "Give me a moment," she said, opening a secure channel to Meridian Command. "Control, this is Sterling. I need confirmation on the nature of the artifacts we're securing." The response came back almost immediately, in the clipped tones of Director Walsh, her direct superior. "Agent Sterling, you have your orders. Secure the artifacts and eliminate all witnesses. No exceptions." "Sir, the technology here appears to be significantly more advanced than our briefings indicated. Perhaps we should consider." "Agent Sterling," Walsh's voice cut her off with dangerous quiet. "Are you questioning your orders?" Victoria's hand instinctively moved to the data recorder on her belt, a habit she'd developed after too many operations where the official reports didn't match what she'd witnessed. "No, sir. Just seeking clarification on the rules of engagement." "There are no rules of engagement. This facility doesn't exist, and neither do the people inside it. Is that clear?" The connection terminated, leaving Victoria staring at the ship and its occupants. Through her optics, she could see the woman, Nora Blackwood, according to the mission files, looking up at the man with an expression of complete trust as they worked to activate some kind of quantum core system. "Ma'am?" Hayes prompted. "Your orders." Victoria made a decision that would change everything. New plan. We go in quiet. I want to talk to them first. Ma'am, that's not. That's an order, Sergeant. Victoria's voice carried the authority of 8 years commanding security operations. We're dealing with precursor technology here. One wrong move could destabilize whatever they're working on and take half the asteroid with it. It wasn't entirely a lie. Precursor technology was notoriously unstable, and Victoria had seen the aftermath of botched recovery operations. But the real reason she wanted to talk first was the nagging certainty that there was more to this situation than Meridian had told her. She approached the ship alone, her weapon lowered but ready. The airlock was open, and she could hear voices from within, tense but not panicked, working together with the kind of coordination that came from absolute trust. That's it, the man's voice said. The quantum matrix is stabilizing. But we need to initialize the neural interface before. Don't move, Victoria called out, stepping into the ship's interior with her weapon raised. Meridian Corporation Security. You're both under arrest. The two froze, the woman's hand hovering over what looked like an activation switch. Up close, Victoria could see they were younger than she'd expected, the woman maybe 28, the man a few years older. There was something about the way they stood together, protective of each other even in the face of armed opposition, that reminded Victoria painfully of herself and her lost partner. You're making a mistake, the woman said, her voice steady despite the obvious fear in her eyes. This technology is dangerous. If Meridian gets their hands on it. Meridian already has their hands on it, Victoria said. This entire facility is now corporate property, along with everything in it. Including us, the man asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Victoria's finger tightened on her weapon's trigger, but she couldn't make herself pull it. There was something in their eyes, not just fear, but a kind of desperate hope that made her think of all the operations where she'd wondered if she was fighting for the right side. My name is Nora Blackwood, the woman said suddenly. This was my grandfather's research facility. He spent decades studying precursor technology, trying to understand it. What you're looking at isn't just a ship, it's a warning. A warning about what? Victoria found herself asking, despite her training. About what's coming, Nora said. The precursors didn't just disappear. They were destroyed by something, and that something is heading this way. My grandfather found evidence, star charts, sensor readings, ruins on dead worlds. There's a pattern of destruction moving through the galaxy, and Earth is directly in its path. Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the asteroid's recycled air. You're lying. Am I? The man stepped forward, his hands visible but his posture protective. Think about it. Why would Meridian want this technology so badly? Why the kill order for civilians? What are they really afraid of? Before Victoria could answer, her calm crackled to life. Agent Sterling, what's your status? You should have secured the facility by now. Victoria looked at the two people in front of her, then at the impossible ship around them. In 8 years of corporate security work, she'd learned to recognize when she was being fed half-truths. The mission briefing had been unusually sparse, the kill order unusually explicit, and her supervisor's reaction to questions unusually hostile. Control, this is Sterling, she said slowly. I need to verify something. What is Meridian's classification for precursor artifacts? Agent Sterling, that information is above your clearance level. Since when? Victoria's voice sharpened. I've been running artifact recovery for 3 years. I've seen the classification protocols. The silence stretched too long. When Walsh's voice came back, it was cold as vacuum. Agent Sterling, you will complete your mission as ordered, or you will be relieved of duty. Permanently. The threat was unmistakable. Victoria looked at Nora and saw her own realization reflected in the younger woman's eyes. This wasn't about protecting corporate interests or human expansion. This was about something much bigger and much darker. I need to see your grandfather's research, Victoria said quietly, lowering her weapon. Victoria. Nora said, reading her name tag. You can't trust them. Whatever they've told you about this mission, it's not the whole truth. I'm beginning to figure that out, Victoria replied. She activated her suit's internal recorder and began documenting everything she could see. Show me what you found. All of it. Over the next hour, as Nora and Dante shared Aldrich Blackwood's research, Victoria felt her world view crumbling. The precursor ruins, the pattern of destruction, the evidence of something vast and malevolent moving through the galaxy, it painted a picture that made Meridian's desperate grab for the technology suddenly make sense. They're not trying to protect humanity, she said finally, staring at star charts that showed dead civilizations scattered across the galaxy. They're trying to control the only weapon that might stop what's coming. And they'll kill anyone who threatens that control, Dante added grimly. Victoria's calm crackled again. Agent Sterling, you have 60 seconds to report mission completion, or we're sending in Team Beta with orders to eliminate all life signs in the facility. Victoria looked at the two people who had trusted her with the truth, then at the ship that might be humanity's only hope. The choice was surprisingly easy. Copy that, Control, she said into her comm, mission accomplished. Artifacts secured, no survivors. She cut the connection and looked at Nora and Dante. We have maybe 10 minutes before they figure out I'm lying. Can you get this thing running? With 3 of us working together, maybe, Nora said. But the neural interface requires absolute trust between the pilots. One hint of deception or hidden agenda, and the quantum matrix could collapse. Victoria met her eyes steadily. Then I guess we'd better learn to trust each other very quickly. As they worked frantically to complete the ship's activation sequence, Victoria found herself drawn into the same kind of desperate cooperation she'd once shared with her lost partner. But this was different, more intense, more personal. Working with Nora and Dante required a level of emotional openness that left her feeling vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with physical danger. The neural links are online, Dante reported. But we need to initialize them together. Full mental connection, no barriers. Victoria felt Nora's hand slip into hers, warm and surprisingly steady. When Dante's hand covered both of theirs, she felt a jolt of connection that went beyond the physical. For just a moment, she could sense their thoughts, their fears, their desperate hope that they were doing the right thing. And underneath it all, she could feel something else growing between the 3 of them, a bond that was part trust, part shared purpose, and part something deeper and more dangerous. The Star Weaver hummed to life around them, its alien systems responding to their combined will. Through the ship's sensors, Victoria could detect Team Beta approaching the facility, armed with enough firepower to level the entire asteroid. Time to go, she said, but her voice was soft, almost wondering. Whatever happened next, she knew she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She'd chosen them over duty, truth over orders, and the unknown over the familiar corruption of corporate power. As the Star Weaver lifted from its berth with impossible grace, Victoria felt the first stirrings of something she'd thought died with her partner, the possibility of connection, of trust, of something worth fighting for beyond just survival. The universe had just become a much more dangerous place, but for the first time in years, she felt truly alive.